should have chats over there. I mean, I guess only us that are logged in can actually see that, but
Yeah, I
should be able
can't
to
see a
interact with
chat.
the chat if you want. This is a live stream, so we might have some chats coming in, but it's also a podcast, so we'll usually, if we do have anyone that we talk to, it'll be before and after. But during the show, we'll just have a conversation. It'll be all good. Cool.
Cool. I'm just checking my Audacity. It's still running. Good.
All right. And I think we're ready with the outline. We're ready with technical setup. Look at us, Grant. We're actually faking it pretty well this time.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll see how long this lasts.
I'm just glad you're here. I'll just stand on the shoulders of Gil.
Awesome. Cool. Well, let's kick it off then. Yeah. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Function Call. I've got Grant Glidewell on the show today, as usual. What's up, Grant?
Hello.
I see you're wearing your green shirt for
I didn't want you to pinch me.
I was going to pinch you.
You're one of those maniacs that like physically assaults people for not wearing a color on a weird holiday.
True. That's not true. My name is Austin Gill, for anyone that is just tuning into the show for the first time, web developer from Portland, Oregon. And on the show today, if you are on the live stream, you'll notice we have a third little box with a third little name on it. That name belongs to Rob Levin. I didn't even ask how do you say your last name? I just assumed.
That's perfect.
Nailed it. Do that first try. Or did we plan that? Rob, let's see. Rob, you are the creator of a front-end framework or library called Agnostic Ui. And we kind of met on Twitter a while back and forth, going back and forth with some Vue questions, and just started kicking off that way. So you asked if we'd be interested to have you on the show, and we said, hell yeah.
Right.
So yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself then?
Yeah. Hey, well, thanks for having me, guys. And let's see. I've been a web developer for probably 20 years. Thought I was full stack for a while, and then moved more and more to the front end, and then even got into like design and illustration and stuff. So I'm kind of a hybrid, I guess. And I don't do it currently, but I've done a lot of style guides, UI component libraries, design systems, and probably most qualified as a design technologist in terms of like what I like to do. But kind of full scope front end developers are so in demand. I have to do a lot of that stuff too. I'm the creator of Agnostic Ui, like you mentioned, and I guess later in the show we can kind of get into why I created Agnostic UI and all that stuff. That's about what I got.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think I'm always impressed by impressed because I can't really relate. There's like the front end chasm is so interesting, where we're seeing this sort of front of the front end and back of the front end, like more logic heavy front end code or more visual representation front end code. And I'm always impressed by the people that can do, the design stuff and throw some pixels around the page and get the markup that looks good and do the accessibility stuff. So, man, you asked me to do some design stuff, and if you want some GeoCities, Comic Sans, terrible looking, yeah, I'm probably not even your man for that. But
so you'd say you're on the back end of the front end, full stack front end, or whatever they're calling it these days?
I don't even know. I wouldn't even. I just feel unqualified in all aspects of it, but I have fun with it.
Generalist?
Generalist, yeah. Generalist is pretty good. A very loud, opinionated generalist that actually can't really do, like, never quite finishes 100% of my tasks.
I mean, considering that, I think it tracks pretty well with my experience with you.
Yeah. Yeah, my battle cry is good enough. So, so yeah, Rob, let's get into Agnostic UI. So it's kind of this front end library, or I guess component library for front ends that is framework agnostic, right? That's hence the name. So you have one style guide that ships for Vue, React, Svelte, Angular, all the big boys and girls. And what's the deal with it? What's the background? Why did you go this approach? What does it do?
Right. Well, agnostic, there's some poetic license to that. It is tied to those frameworks, but at least it's available in Vue. It's Vue 3 only. Svelte, React, and Angular, as you mentioned, and you can use. I don't like the term vanilla JavaScript. Let's say platform JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. It works fine with that as well. But the idea was that it would be nice to be able to have one style sheet for, say, a button that's consistent and be able to use it in different frameworks, at least the popular ones. So sort of the impetus for this was I was working at a place a few years ago, and I had built a React-based, or the team, we had built a React-based design system. And I think in like 1 week, all these things happen. I started playing with Svelte, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. I'd like to use this. Oh, I can't, because our components are only React. I was diving into the code there, and I noticed that the admin system was built in Vue, because we had an adventurous developer who decided to do that, which is great. And then we were about to start on a back office app that was separate from our flagship app. And we started a team out in Singapore, and their lead came out and said, hey, we're really productive in Angular. Can we do this in Angular? We'd probably build it 3 times as fast. And that was a problem because our branded components were in React. So they had to use React. So I was just sort of pondering this, and I was like, this is silly. Here I am yet again building another component library. And, it's tied to this framework. That's no good. And so I thought about To Do MVC. Do you guys remember To Do MVC? I think Adi Osmani might have started it. It was like it's a project. Yeah, it's a To Do MVC. It's like a popular JavaScript exercise where you write a To Do app in JavaScript. Well, it became kind of a cult of exercises, and I put a link in our outline. But basically, if you look at To Do MVC, it's available in like 20 frameworks, like Knockout JS, like Ember, and all the frameworks you ever used. And I was like, well, couldn't you do something sort of similar with a component library? Obviously, To Do MVC has had a lot of community support and contributions, and there's just little old me. So I've picked the popular ones, React, Vue, Svelte, and Angular. But eventually, maybe somebody else wants to do web components or Solid or Preact or one of these other ones. But the idea was like, these are all really CSS and HTML driven. It's silly that they have to be tied to a framework, because a button, what makes a button on brand for our company is really the CSS. As you get into more exotic components like tabs and things that do have a lot of functional requirements in terms of JavaScript, it gets a little bit more coupled and hairy and whatnot. But overall, the thing that makes a component on brand is the CSS and maybe the HTML. And so I was of the preference, not opinion or whatever, but I was of the preference of using CSS modules when coding in React. I'm kind of old school. I used to do, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript has to be completely separate. And then I kind of learned to think in components. I was like, okay, I can wrap my head around them all being in one component together, but I still believe in encapsulation. And so I kind of avoided CSS in JavaScript. And before we get a bunch of angry emails, I don't necessarily think one's better than the other or whatever. That's just what I have historically gravitated towards and used. So I was already doing that. And I was thinking, well, if you can copy your button.css file into the React component, couldn't you do the same thing with these other frameworks? So I did a little experimentation, and sure enough, Vue, if you use a single file component, it's really great with CSS modules. And then Svelte uses its own little obfuscation thing, similar to Vue, but it's not CSS modules. And the CSS modules npm packages I found didn't seem like they have a huge amount of support. So I just kind of did it the Svelte, vanilla Svelte way. And then Angular uses Vue encapsulation. So I don't know, I figured out that I could write up these little node scripts that would copy the styles from the single source of truth. So let me back up. Imagine you have a button .css and a button.html. And all you do is go in there and I want to make sure that my markup is semantic and accessible and I'm using the right elements for the right things and all that. And I want it to look a certain way. You get that going. And you can imagine copying this button.css over into your React package and then copy the same button CSS over into your Vue single file component. Imagine you have a regular expression for your style tags in your Vue single file component, and your node script looks for that and plops in the same exact CSS. I won't go into the other two, but you get the idea. So it worked, and I even have a CSS tricks article kind of on the basics of how I do it. It's nothing groundbreaking, trust me. But anyway, that was sort of how it unfolded, and I just sort of kept doing it on the side and got a lot more motivated this year. I forget why, but I got a lot more motivated this year and actually made some decent progress. But it's still very early in the project, and I have a lot more components to create and cover. But I don't know. I have like 20, 25 of them. I have a little list of things that I like. Okay, to be on par with Bootstrap or Chakra UI, I need to do 15 more. And like I'm doing a drawer now. Like I did a dialogue, and now I need a drawer because of course I need a drawer. So it's I'm still chugging along. It's very early, but it's showing promise.
Yeah. I mean, you said you have 25 components, right? But that's 25 across 4 or 5 if you count platform native. So
yeah,
it's 125 components, right?
I'm a glutton for punishment.
Yeah. So I've got some questions. Grant, did you have any before I jump in with some?
No, I'm digging into the article that you mentioned. The CSS tricks article is called, as I slowly scroll my way to the top, how to make a component that supports multiple frameworks in a monorepo.
Yeah.
We'll
what?
So I'm gonna say I didn't write that article that long ago, but I completely neutered my complete monorepo because I'm fed up with hoisting, but that's a whole nother. Anyway, so do as I say, not as I do, right?
Okay.
Did you guys see that, by the way, that CSS tricks? I can say this now because yeah, you guys heard about CSS tricks is now DigitalOcean or CSS tricks / digital. I don't know exactly. I read the article Chris wrote, but it's a joint venture. But DigitalOcean took it over or acquired it.
Yeah, they acquired them. That's pretty exciting for Chris.
Yeah.
It'll be awesome. We'll see how that plays out. But DigitalOcean will be good stewards for the CSS trick stuff because they've been writing awesome stuff for the community for years now. So that'll be exciting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to get into a couple of the questions around Agnostic UI. Because I think this is interesting. So it was kind of bred out of the need that you experienced on your team. Because when I see, let me formulate my thoughts here. When I see a library that's designed to work across multiple frameworks, it's either something like Bootstrap, which is its own sort of design, and then they want to support other frameworks. But I think that there's something kind of different with Agnostic UI, because yours is sound like it's designed to create your own styles, or have like your style supported across multiple frameworks, but designed to work within the same team. So I'm thinking like micro front ends, where you have on the same front end different teams contributing to different portions of the front end. Part of it is Vue over here, part of it's React over there, part of it's Angular down there, right? And to maintain design parity across these teams, that's sort of the intention of Agnostic UI, or one of the use cases. Another one being if you have enterprise applications or enterprise companies that have multiple applications across different properties. So, subdomain 1, subdomain 2, subdomain 3, and they all are built and managed by different teams. You often see that issue where does the button look a little bit different on subdomain 1 than it does on subdomain 2? Like, what's the deal there? And it's because you either have someone took the best stab at matching some style guide, or they have an outdated style guide or something like that, right? So those are the use cases that are the first ones to come to mind. And it sounds like that's a little bit of what influenced like your background, your experience, that influenced that direction. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say definitely those two use cases. One where you have literally separate apps where you want to use different technology, micro front ends. Although I think most people would say shipping two frameworks in the same application, even with micro up front ends, is going to be a problem, just for the obvious reasons of shipping two things. But in my reality, the last few jobs I've worked at, there's always multiple apps. There's a flagship app usually. There's usually some sort of a back office app. There's an admin app. There's just multiple apps, and then there's landing pages and marketing apps. And I'd say that's probably the most practical reason. There's also some novelty to it. I was like, I could use the practice, coding in these 4 different things. That would look good on my resume. And because, man, I've got really deep into the CSS for a few years. Had some children, got very complacent, and I was like, I need to catch back up. So, the typical imposter syndrome, motivation is always helpful too.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm the self-talk when I'm coding this thing up is hilarious. I'm just like, why
it's such a roller coaster.
Oh yeah, like I'm using Angular binding and syntax in Vue, and I was like, can't you keep it together after the 20th compile? So now I've resolved to cheat harder. That's what I keep telling myself now. Put the last component you did up in Vue on the side over here and cheat. It's your I'm not going to say it. Keep it G rated.
You can say it. It's
okay.
Yeah. I don't think we're G rated as a podcast. At least if we were, I would work pretty hard to get out of that. That's like a shitty rating to have for a coding podcast. So like it's interesting to me. Like this is a problem space that is kind of outside of my area of expertise and interest and all of that. Like this is, however, interesting because you have tackled a problem that traditionally would, I think, be addressed just by telling people no, right? Like, you want to build this in Vue? No. You want to build this in Angular? No. We're a React shop. But what this affords is like teams a certain amount of autonomy and freedom to like, we're going to build whatever we want, and our underlying kind of component or styling system or component library or whatever will support us in that. And as somebody who like works with teams that want that. Like this is very freeing, and it also allows for, like as you were saying earlier on, businesses love this increased velocity, right? Like we're really good with Angular. So like it's a problem space where initially my reaction is, "Oh, I just wouldn't, like we work in React. This is what we do." But as I pay attention and listen and kind of process what this actually does and allows, it's really significant.
Well, thanks. I'm, honestly, with it being so new, sometimes I think it's, then it's like just a novelty, or who am I kidding? But I do think that there's some compelling use cases. I do know, I'm a guy who didn't really have a problem or issue with the CSS cascade. And I didn't actually have problems when we had some regressions. I'd go and clean it up really quickly, but my product manager wasn't always happy with me. But like I built some sort of traditional CSS type of libraries. I did a Sass buttons with a friend of mine, Alex Wolf, and it was using SMAX. I don't know the sort of methodology of writing CSS, but it was very much like a Bootstrap just for buttons. And we like went, all in on all the different kind of fancy visual buttons you could think of. And it was pretty popular for a while back in its heyday, but that's like 8-9 years ago. But all to say, I really believed that CSS should be in its own file, that HTML should be in its own file, and JavaScript. Like I was really big on this whole decoupling. I had a little bit of traditional background from doing software development with the solid principles, which is like cohesion, do one thing, do it well, encapsulation, program to an interface, not, so all these sort of traditional ideas. And so when React came along, I was like, what the heck? I was one of those guys, right? I was like, what the heck is going on here? And then, it took me months to just sort of bend my brain and accept. And the reality was, though, working at a modern place, the ship had sailed. The team, they had the younger cats had already decided for me. So it wasn't like I had a choice in the matter. And so I was like, I gotta like literally like change with the times, buddy. And so I started thinking of it like, okay, hold on a second. It's a component and it's its own thing. And it's like it's got its own like cell membranes and like, it's its own world. And I rewired my old school brain. All to say, the reality was that I couldn't have just stayed. I had to like realize that the team is more powerful than any individual. And I think this is at any job. Like, and I kind of was like, at the time, I have to admit, I was like, I can code up a whole design system and they'll have to use it. But no, they don't. Because you go on paternity leave and you realize your style guide is completely broken and they've neutered it. No, they don't. They can use whatever they want. And so what you're talking about is developer experience, human beings. And I take it, Grant, that you lead, you lead teams, and you kind of play both the coder role, but also like managing human beings. And so, with that said, I think, if people want to use CSS and JS, they're going to use it. If they want to use Tailwind, they're going to use it. And I guess at the end of the day, if they can build a great product, that's what's important. I'm probably going to gravitate towards the things that I like, but I also need to keep an eye out and be able to, like, I need to be able to use utility classes. That's just like kind of, I got to do that. And I was also very resistant to those. Agnostic I kind of took inspiration from Bootstrap and I sprinkled like way less than Bootstrap. I sprinkled like bare minimum utility classes. But hey, and I don't like all the classes sitting there in the markup that something like a Tailwind creates. I don't. But can you build a great product? Of course. A lot of the great products that are being built right now are probably at this point in Tailwind because it's very popular. They have their little just-in-time thing that prunes out there's a lot of great things that they're doing. So I have to kind of acknowledge that. I'm kind of going on a digression, but I think bringing it back to your thing with your team, you said, like, if you had it your way, you probably just do it in React, but you've got to be able to hire and retain developers. So if you've got some guys that really want to do, guys and gals that want to do Vue 3 because that's their thing, or they want to do Svelte.
So if I want to steal
yeah.
Austin and have him come work with me, which
just need Agnostic Ui.
This is the dream. Well, no, but like, so like from a philosophical standpoint, the strength of what you're creating is really incredible. And like the business argument is super strong. Like you're saying, if I want to hire developers that are uncaged by, whatever limitations the project lead might put on them, like that's amazing.
That just put me on another idea. Like you could, do you know if this works with astro.build? Because astro.build is this front end tool that's supposed to also be kind of framework agnostic, where you can have Vue developers working next to React developers, next to Svelte developers. And at the end of the day, one of the big, in my opinion, totally valid arguments against micro front ends is that you end up shipping Vue, React, and
I see where you're
Angular
going.
runtimes to the client, right? But astro.build kind of takes those components and like generates, I think it's a static site generator, but it can work, it's framework agnostic, so it can actually generate just the HTML at the end of the day, which would be, all built by agnostic separate teams, and at the end of the day you have this sort of unified version of an application without the
I had not even thought about that. And
yeah,
as you say that, if you're right, that because my big objection when you brought up the micro front end, sharing the framework, serving them all to the same, but if that does make sense. I haven't played with Astro and Remix and all the new islands architecture and stuff, but if that's true, that you could have Vue code and React code and it all gets generated into raw JavaScript, is what I think you're saying, then that would take away. Well, okay, hold on a second now.
So what's interesting,
it depends on whether it's server rendered, right?
It's static site generated.
Right. And so as long as you as long as the code from each of those frameworks and each of those teams working on those are aware that the end result needs to be static and can build to that end, like we're not building some like huge Redux store or Vuex store or whatever, then the end result can be static. But then there's also some slick stuff going on with kind of progressively enhancing that on the front end, if I'm remembering correctly, right? Where if we need React to load for certain sections of the page, we can do that, or Vue or whatever. It's all coming together, folks. Like we're putting together
we're building the next big framework.
Well, the non-stack of the future. Like it's whatever you want. So it's
so okay, so stepping back from these hypotheticals, right? I want to take a look back into a little
very
bit
interesting though.
Maybe check it out because it's pretty interesting. But getting into what makes us a little bit different than some of the other options out there. So you talked about Bootstrap, and my thoughts kind of went there as well. Bootstrap, Chakra UI, they're both, I guess, really like at this point sort of namespaces. They're CSS libraries, right? And if you want with HTML, you can import Bootstrap and then implement all the classes. The hard thing is remembering everything and implementing those like different Bootstrap components in Vue or React or whatever. So the Bootstrap team said, cool, well, we have this base CSS framework. Let's generate some child libraries under the Bootstrap namespace, and we'll have a library specifically for React. We'll have a library specifically for Vue, right? So now you can get.
Is that true? React. I don't know. Are those like official ports, or are they third? Are they?
Oh, they might be third party. Actually, they may be third party, but Well, yeah, I guess that's kind of the difference here, right? I think with Chakra they may be first party, but I'm not sure. But what you're telling me is your library kind of, instead of having these as separate npm dependencies, the Vue, React, Angular, Svelte, it's all in the same package. Is that right?
Oh, actually, no. It's in the same repository.
Okay,
I have
got it.
a mono repo where my understanding is a mono repo just having one repository or place where you have multiple projects. I've neutered the hoisting, like I mentioned, I think in the pre-show chat. So it's not. It used to be a Yarn workspaces based monorepo, but now it's just literally separate packages. And I do create npm packages so there's an agnostic -svelte, agnostic React. There's an agnostic -css, and in that package is where I start. So I'll just kind of to zip through how it usually goes is I say, oh, I need a button. I do create some HTML and some CSS. I get it going, and I use a thing called Fractal. It's just a tool, and it helps me just kind of plop up that style guide, and I can get that going. And then I have a node script which will copy, say, the button.css into whichever framework I decide to start with. And I usually,
that's cool.
And I don't know how I decide that. I think I switch it up every time. I never start with Angular. I can say that. That's always like the last one I do. Anyway, and it's like, and definitely once I've got the first one going, and I feel like I've hit all the corner cases, then I go to the next guy. So maybe I've got a Svelte one in the can for a dialogue, and then I'll go do, well, dialogue's a bad example because that was more complex. But say I have this button in Svelte, I'll go now over to Vue, and I'll get that coded up, and I'll definitely reference the code in the Svelte one while I'm doing the Vue one, and that goes a lot faster. And it's interesting, some of the different nuanced different things that you can do in one framework over another, but it's very similar between React. At the end of the day, React, Vue, and Svelte, the component is pretty similar. And one of the constraints for Agnostic UI is I think of these as primitives, because the whole idea is that what's driving the whole thing is that your button looks a certain way, that it's branded, right? That was sort of the impetus for the catalyst for this thing, right? Yeah. But because of that, like, I kind of try to do the minimal amount to wrap that button in React or Vue. So where do you draw the line, right? For some reason, I decided to do pagination, which was pretty involved. For some reason, I decided to do tabs. But philosophically, I'm trying not to do. I kind of felt like, also it's like you have to have tabs in the UI component library. You don't have to have a not a table, but a data table, right? Or data grid, or one of these like really sophisticated, complex. You don't have to have that in there. Now, if you do, a lot of people will like you because, oh, they've got a combo box, they've got a data table. In fact, this is one of the things I kind of wanted to touch on, was like, how is a component library judged by consumers? Because I have looked at this a little bit as a new guy, and I see a lot of people like, oh, well, I chose Ant because they had all these. They had a tree checkbox, recursive, unlimited, amazing tree checkbox, and I can even say it 3 times because it's recursive.
I don't need it, but if I do, they got it.
Right, it has all the things. But then you hear, and this was actually, it made it very popular. And I don't want to bag on Ant, but I've been hearing lately, and I haven't used it, but that it's bloated, that it's got accessibility problems, blah, 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 blah. I don't know. I'm just saying, it's all hearsay, but maybe it's true. So, and then these things are fluid too. Like Chakra, I remember when I first checked out Chakra UI, I think the accessibility was poor. And now I haven't audited it. I don't have that much time to audit everything, but they've really improved their accessibility. And I've had a little dialogue with the creator, online dialogue, and like, I think he's kind of ambitious and is willing to refactor and try new things and stuff, you know. So you can't take something like Chakra UI in 2021 even and consider that that's what Chakra UI is now in 2022. And I think that probably goes for all of them. I don't know, but I digress as usual.
So I think it's interesting that you talk about like the choice that folks will make on which UI library or which component library or which design system they will use, and I think a lot of folks will wind up like we did. We're building our own design system. We're building our own component library. We're building our own set of patterns out of that. And I think there's a bit of privilege in being in a position to kind of have the ability to do that. But I think that's where a lot of people land. But this is where products, libraries like Agnostic UI and even something like Utensils, even that, right, has some use here, which is if you can base this in something that is broadly applicable, when you fix accessibility issues like what you just brought up, which is a huge deal with a lot of like very widely used UI libraries out there. If you built your UI library or your design system on something like Agnostic UI, ostensibly, if the fix for those is in the CSS, you can fix it in multiple places. If it isn't, which, I mean, you know, we only have so much control over tab indexing and some of the more kind of like intricate behaviors that need to be brought up to snuff with accessibility. It may not live there, but a lot of it, specifically visually, could be brought up across the board. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think there's so many factors. I mean,
so what makes a good, like when you are comparing front end libraries or maybe looking for inspiration for your next thing, right? What are the things that you are judging other libraries upon?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question.
Or the sort of minimal viable design system.
Yeah. Well, I did want to say something about building a custom design system from scratch, because I forgot to mention that was actually one of my other reasons or motives for building Agnostic UI. You see, I've built a lot of these systems, and I've been in the situation twice where I basically felt like I hadn't been able to get as much of it complete as I wanted to, because I'm pretty good at like making a feature look good, and PMs will like, oh, we gotta get Rob to go work on this product because that's what matters to the business, and I get pulled off the design system. And I have a friend who leads a team. I won't say where, but she led a team and they were building a custom design system, and it got she didn't feel like it. I don't think she felt like it went as well as she was hoping. It's very hard to build a full-blown design system from scratch. And as somebody who, like, I love having components, Lego block. I totally believe in design systems and building products this way. But I have to be honest, it's very hard, no matter how good you are at building these things, to come in with no components and to get this thing done fast enough to where the people who don't give a about your clean code and stuff, like, this is the ROI on this stunk. We're not shipping. And so I was like, well, I believe in this way of working. It's like, I believe in test-driven development. You're not going to tell me not to write tests. I believe in accessibility. You're not going to tell me. So you have to kind of figure out how you're going to do it the way you want to do it. And I was like, well, I want to build this library anyway, but the next design technologist role I take maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but like, I think it'll be contingent on like would you use Agnostic Ui? Because I want, and my selling point would be like, hey, look, we're already 80%, 90% of the way there. I can get this built in 6 weeks because I know my own code base. And so because the other option when you're faced with building a custom design system is to leverage a library. So if I was going to a shop that did Vue, and I had to have fine grained control of the CSS, I would consider Vue Tensils, and I'd probably help you get it,
Oh yeah,
get it composition API, whatever, right? Like, because the other thing is like, and I don't expect this from like the larger community, but like I think people should go in and look at the code before they decide, whether to use framework X versus framework Y. So when I was stuck on tabs, and I went and looked like 10 Vue libraries because I couldn't figure out how to keep the reference to each. Like, you kind of have to do this thing where when you click the tab button, you open the right panel. And I forget why that's complex, but it is. And you had figured out, you had a solution in there. It was like one line of code, and it was like the light bulb moment thing. And I zip through code pretty fast these days. And I was like, nope, I don't understand it. I don't like this. Or, nope, this is pretty cool, but they're not tackling the same problem. Oh, this is cool. And not to give you a big head, but to give you a big head, I was like, I understand this code. It's clean, it's thoughtful, and it had the solution to my problem. And so I snagged whatever your solution was for tabbing, keeping the tabbing index and that connection between the button and the panel that's open. And so that left an impression on me. But I don't think most people that choose front-end frameworks
are looking at the code.
Metric. Yeah, they're like, well, does it have a data table? Does it
have?
I built at that company where I decided to build Agnostic Ui, the React design system. It was a custom design system. I didn't want to build a multi-select from scratch, and at the time I used React Select. And I just remember there was no problems. We put a very thin wrapper around it and called it a day, and it was fine. And so there's a pros and cons, like building everything from scratch. If you're a little more senior developer and you're a little more in touch with your business development side of your company, like it's not just like you just do whatever's the cleanest, most purest code. Like, that's not how the real world works, buddy. you got people to answer to. You've got meetings with people, stakeholders. It's a tough, that's a tough place to be in if you can't stand behind the ROI on your project. So that's sort of, for me, if I would, the next job I take as a design technologist, I would probably leverage something to get me started. And luckily I have my own in Agnostic UI, but if not, I don't think I'd build something completely from scratch anymore. This is my life. I actually told myself, this is the last time I build a component library. I'm never doing it again. I'm going to do this one last one, but I'm going to try to do it right. Maybe I'll do web components next. I don't know.
That sounds so, that really goes back to my whole philosophy around why I was building Vue Tensils when I started it, because I'd gone from one project to the next, and then there was like, oh, I need another modal in this project again. Well, I guess I'm going to rebuild it. And you do enough of those and it just becomes a pain. And if you're lucky, you can copy code from an old project and bring it over and strip out the, or replace the styles, maybe improve upon it a bit. But yeah, there is something to be said to sort of that working with blocks and component-based design systems that you're talking about. And it's a fine line to walk, because sometimes you're going to run into a place where we have this button, use the button, please. And then a developer comes and says, yeah, well, we need the button to do this thing, and it's not designed to do that thing. And do you make another abstraction over the button? Do you add more functionality to that button for this one-off case? And how do you balance that? And then also, you touched on an interesting point about these bloated front-end libraries or component libraries, these ones that have everything in the kitchen sink and that they ship with. And I think library authors are coming around to see that, are doing things right so that they're tree shakeable. So if you don't use part of it, it doesn't, you don't get that code in your final bundle. It's still hard to escape the CSS aspects in that. But it's interesting because then the discussion is, well, do you want something that does just enough? And then you're sort of reaching for those more specialized use cases. Does it make sense to have one library that does everything, or several individual libraries that do just the one things you need, right? Like the combo
like
box.
an AG grid for data table.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, we use that. Like, the company I work for is using Angular, and that was already there before I got there. But like, gosh, building AG grid from scratch, or even expecting your component library of choice to have something like AG grid, to me just seems like, huh, really? You that
right? Yeah, there's so much.
Or charting graphing library. A lot of times those are going to be a separate library that you use, right?
Yeah.
So I don't get. I mean, I do get it, but I don't necessarily agree that should be a huge metric when you're comparing these things. I think like ease of use for the developer, and like that's actually pretty big, because somebody like Grant, who's got a team, and in a way, like, you might be willing to do it a certain way, but if you've got 5 people and you're trying to be a multiplier, like, you've got to like, and then they all loved Shocker UI, for example, and they wanted to do CSS and JavaScript. Hey, well, that's what the team wants to do. Let's roll with it. Like,
Yeah.
So all those things are factors, but like, I don't think choosing a UI library just because it's got all the widgets, it makes a lot of sense personally. Like, I actually heard some, because Agnostic UI is new, and there are certain widgets that I don't have. And I heard somebody say on the internet that, wow, I checked it out, it doesn't have a combo box. So I passed.
Man.
I was
and then when you have a combo box, that combo box is not searchable. How dare you?
Combo boxes. Yeah, I don't include that either. That is such a hard pattern to get right.
Do you have a calendar?
I don't have a calendar.
Is it Gregorian all the way back to the 1100s?
Yeah, I don't know, but it's a pretty good calendar, though. I'm pretty, yeah.
It's a pretty good calendar.
It's all right.
It shows dates and stuff.
It's a burlesque calendar.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I'm into
it. These things are so like bottomless pits. So like, what is the perfect calendar? Is it a calendar that has a date range? Now you need 2 calendars. Is it a calendar? So we have a calendar at work where you have the 2 months to do date ranges, but you also have a quick picker. And that was like an absolute, that's no, that is a product need requirement. No, we're not getting rid of, like, that was the thing. And it is nice, but I actually haven't seen a UI component library that has that thing.
What's a great reliable pattern for that is 2 inputs. There you go. There's your date range.
Yeah, 2 inputs, right?
Type it in yourself. The HTML date input is actually all right.
Especially if you're using it on a mobile device.
That's the thing about libraries, is there's so many things that there's so much to account for: performance, accessibility, responsiveness, and just so many.
Well, you're talking about that with the date picker. So because of being practical and trying to do primitives and not bite off more than I can chew, so far, my select component is basically a select component. It's an HTML5 select component. So you look at the select multi-select of the raw HTML5, and it's kind of funny. It's like here they all are,
Yeah.
And it's like, let's make it size 4, and then say you have 8, so you can scroll it. But it's weird because we're so used to these fancy multi-selects and React select and select ties and select to, but then you get it on mobile, and I was like, wow, this is awesome on mobile. It's like, it's got the like little slider thing and the native stuff. It's great on mobile.
Yeah.
So which is better, like, I don't know, like, so, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to have a drop down menu going. It's at the back of the backlog, but it's just like, geez, I don't know, these expectations.
Well, I mean, I always find that if you're building it for yourself, if you're building for the things that you need, most of the stuff in Vue-Tensile, I think all the stuff in Vue-Tensils came out of my own personal need. And some other people have come and gone throughout the project and been like, oh, it'd be cool if it had this. And it's like, yeah, well, PRs are open, But yeah, if you build
do you
stuff,
get many contributions?
no,
No. Yeah.
no, and I get I get quite a few issues, but I'm only supporting one library or one framework, and I can't imagine trying to tackle 4 or 5.
Yeah.
So
I'm a little afraid of what lies ahead.
Yeah. Open source is tough because you want it to. It's like popularity is just the double-edged sword of. It's cool when it's popular, but then also the issues start flooding in.
Yeah.
So fellas, we are getting close on time, and I know that we had some other stuff that we wanted to cover. So I was wondering if we wanted to jump into some of that stuff in the last 8 minutes or so.
Do a quick run through.
Yeah. I know that some things that I saw that were kind of interesting that you had mentioned were CSS resets and abstractions around grid systems.
Right. Okay. Okay. So I think because I had a dialogue with you that I looked at Bedrock CSS. I actually got. Speaking of people jumping, bringing up issues on Agnostic Ui, there was a person who thought that I should have like an opinionated kind of a thing because I have a reset, but he wanted a little more Rob's opinion type of thing. I was like, gee, what is Rob's opinion? And so I was like, well, I know this smart guy Austin Gill has this thing. I'll go look at his. So I looked at yours. I looked at Adam Argyle's, and I was just like, oh, and my thing. I'll tell you what I do is I go look at something I don't understand what it is. I go look on MDM and I figure out what it is. And so I looked at, and I do have my own opinions and some experience, but like I don't remember all the all the resets, the most modern resets. But I actually very recently had one that I think is kind of a fun one. So I had this examples page with tabs that are kind of like pages within a page, probably an anti-pattern anyway. But one of them did not have a scroll bar because the natural content didn't require it. And so what happens is that the width changes and all your content shifts. And so I found a solution which was kind of cool, I thought, and I think it makes sense to be included in a reset. Scroll bar gutter stable both edges.
Oh, I gotta look that up.
It's very, very, so it prevents shifting if certain pages have scroll bars and others do not. So this solved my problem, and I added it to my opinions thing, which is sort of like my extra reset. If you want it, you have to opt in to use my opinions.css, and it's very new and undocumented, but I have most of it commented out, and I could lie and say that I got that from looking at Apache configs where they comment stuff out, but I actually looked at Bedrock, and I like the way you comment out things like, hey, if you want to use this, uncomment it. It's kind of cool, but I'll leave it to you. I was like, yeah, I like that pattern.
I do that. I do that because, again, those are like these. Most of the tools I create for myself so that I can not have to do it again later. And the stuff that I leave commented out is because it's more difficult. it's easier to add something than it is to take something away. So
Absolutely.
I want to be very, very sure that something belongs in a project, because if I ever add something and someone's depending on that, and I might not know, who, then it's hard to get rid of. Like, deprecation is really difficult.
Yeah,
Um,
agreed.
so, but yeah, I think resets are fun and interesting, and I don't know. It's something that almost doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, you're going to, like, in theory, you're going to change all of the styles anyway, or like
Right.
most of the styles in a reset that you publish for other people to use are probably not going to be used. So
Yeah, I did this thing because I was asked, but it's mainly like documentation and comments, and I the whole time I'm like, I don't know, should this be uncommented? Should it, like, because yeah, I agree. It's like once it's in there, could do damage.
yeah.
Like I did, he had mentioned like it would be nice if I didn't have to set the headings to your CSS custom properties. So like a heading,
Mhm.
agnostics heading 1 CSS custom property is already set to an H1 and whatnot. So I was like, okay, well, I can do that. That seems very reasonable. But in terms of like I'm looking at one I left in there uncommented, meaning it's gonna, if you use this file, it's gonna be there. The WebKit font smoothing anti-aliased.
Mm.
Like that's highly, highly debated. And my understanding is that now it's good to use, but but but, but man,
Yeah.
you want to go down that rabbit hole because there's some vehement blog posts about not using it. And then the most recent one I found was like, well, that article was from 2019, and since then it's changed. I'm like, okay, well, I
Yeah.
don't know
It's hard
all
to
the
keep up.
things. I just don't know all the things. Sorry.
No one does. But that's why I think it's handy to just leave those out. Unless you're like really, really sure about something, then leave it out. And it's always easy for someone else to just add it to their project,
Hmm.
especially like a reset or a foundational starting point. Someone can also always add on top of that. But for some reason, if you add something in your project and someone has to take it away or
Hmm.
remove it, it's more annoying. At least that's my
Right.
opinion.
Well, my opinion.css is opt-in as a file, and then
Yeah.
within it, I have stuff commented out. So if you
Yeah.
opt in to use that file, you're going to get the WebKit anti-alias thing. So who knows? Did you want to go into grids? I know we have very little time left.
Yeah, we got
Or
some time to do that. We were just so the question was kind of like with modern technology or the state of CSS today, does it make sense to have frameworks or abstractions around CSS grid, like layout systems for grid
yeah.
systems, right?
So for me, I I feel it is not basically. So I found a really cool Flexbox 2 CSS thing, which was basically that. And I initially had that for Flexbox in Agnostic UI and ripped it out. I was like, holy schmoly, this is a lot of lines of code that this is generating. And Flexbox is an abstraction itself. It is an abstraction. So why am I putting an abstraction on top of an abstraction? And I believe that even more so with CSS Grid. So I didn't
Mm.
even, and I've done grids back since we had float-based grids and stuff. And so I believe, I think CSS Grid is a little bit hard to learn, but I think it's the way to go in combination with Flexbox. I don't think you really need more than those tools. Agnostic UI does offer utilities around some basic Flexbox stuff. I just find myself all the time needing to sprinkle some Flexbox somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty careful because I don't have a just-in-time pruner thing like
Yeah.
Tailwind. So I'm pretty careful not to add too many of those. I have the Flexbox stuff and a few more, but I'm pretty light on the utilities. And I know I use the logical properties. So like
Mm.
MBE is margin block end. which is like, for those that aren't hip to logical properties, that's like if you did margin bottom, depending on the writing mode. But that's like the cool new way to do it is margin block start would be above, margin block end would be below if you're in a, you know, American US based writing mode or whatever. But if you aren't, everything flips for free. Like if you're right to left or top to bottom, it all just works. And IE 11 is end of lifing in a couple months anyway. So I think it's really the way to go. And all to say, with how does this tie into grid? With the utilities. So I do have like a MB, like MBE8 would be give me well, it's not really 8 pixels. I have a weird thing that I do in Agnostic that may be debatable. So like I have a fluid -16, which is really one rem. But for me, I like to think, and I'm just so used to it. And I know like my manager at my job hated that. And I had to change it to like size 1, size 2, and I get why people don't like mapping the fluid stuff to pixels. But hey, we all have our idiosyncrasies. So like if you do fluid 32, you're going to get, what is that? 2 rem? 3 rem. Wait. No, 2 rem. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So if you did MBE 32, it would be like you put margin bottom, basically, if you're in the right writing mode, but using the new margin block end stuff. And that's like a utility I use all the time, especially if I'm prototyping, like to space things out. And that and some Flexbox. I don't have a lot of utilities, but getting back to the whole layout, I think with those sorts of things, some CSS properties with sizes, and the Flexbox and grid, you don't need anything else.
Yep.
I just don't see why you need to add, 2,000 lines of grid abstraction code. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, because I wrote and maintained a grid system a long time ago that was based on Flexbox. And yeah, to have a good one, you need it to be responsive and work on these different screens. And now CSS Grid handles that pretty well on its own.
Yeah.
I do like, I would say the utility classes are one level of abstraction on
right.
CSS
You can move
Grid.
faster when you're, depending on the type of code you're writing. If you're just laying a demo out, having a utility is really handy. One thing about Tailwind, and this is, whatever, everybody's got their own things. Like you have to learn a whole new DSL when you use utility. Even when you use my utility, like you might look at my utility and it's like, well, why did he do it that way? So it's not a large surface, but you still have to learn these utility classes. It's not CSS. These are like variable names and you have to learn them. So is that where you want to spend your time? I don't know.
I'm trying to come up with a tool to fix that. It went horribly wrong when I tried to dog food it today. It was absolutely terrible. But I'll go back to the drawing board and see if I can come up with something. But I think that's all the time we got for today. At the end of the show, Rob, we'd like to give shout outs to people, places, things, concepts, animals, food, whatever. So we're going to jump into that now. I'm not going to put you on the spot right away in case you need some time. So Grant, you're up.
You're going to put me on the spot right away?
I'm going to put you on the spot. You know what's coming.
I do. Unfortunately, I know what's coming. So I have recently been dealing with like some home automation stuff and been looking for like what out there is actually good. There is a lot of really bad stuff, and I think that there's a lot of really like overpriced stuff. And so I try to find something in the middle. And what I found was Fight Electric, FEIT. I don't know, maybe it's Feet Electric. That doesn't make much sense. It's probably Fight. Anyway, they make really good, like reliable, reasonably priced stuff. I've used their light bulbs that you can dim from an app and change colors and stuff like that for a couple of years now. I got them at Costco of all places, and recently I needed like a power strip, and they happen to make one, and it's brilliant. Previously, I was using one that was hooked up to the Wink network, and I don't know if y'all remember all the controversy around that, but basically nothing works anymore with Wink. It's all dead, and it's terrible. So that power strip won't power anything at all. So I picked one of these up from Fight, and it was $20, maybe $30, and works flawlessly, consistently. I love it. That is my shout out. Fight Electric.
Very nice.
Wi-Fi
I want to hear
stuff.
more about the home automation stuff. That stuff, I don't do any of it, but it's very enticing, very interesting. So I'm going to give a shout out to a show that we'll be watching tonight. It's Raised by Wolves, season 2. I think I've given a shout out to it before. It's such a fun sci-fi series about the future and the future of humanity and generation ships that have to go and like repopulate a different planet. And it's just like there's artificial intelligence and aliens and androids, and it's a lot of fun. It's cool. Really
future
awesome.
wolves?
Raised by wolves? What?
Are there future wolves?
Not yet, but we'll see.
I'm not watching it until you tell me that there's wolves.
There's wolves.
I'll add it to the queue. Right after lots of Spider-Man, lots of PJ Masks.
Yeah, PJ Masks.
It's 2-year-old TV.
That's great.
All the time.
Yeah, this is not a 2-year-old show. Well, I mean, it's 2 years old.
I can relate to
but
that.
It's not for 2-year-olds. Rob, what do you got for us?
Okay, mine is not as cool. It's all still tech stuff. One-dimensional guy over here. Sorry, but I wanted to shout out for your utensils, Austin, for the code quality and learnability. Probably the listeners here are already hip to it, but if you're looking to just like if you like to look at source code, look at Austin's utensils. It's pretty cool. And then the other one, since we talked about grid layout, there's this old YouTube done by Traversy Media, and he's coding along the basic grid stuff, and it's very easy to follow. It's from 2017, so it's maybe a little dated, but a lot of the basics of grid are the same. So if somebody's like me and they waited way too long to learn grid, because I didn't learn grid till this year, check that out. It'll be in the show notes. It's, I think, called CSS Grid Layout Crash Course.
Yeah, sure. We'll have that link in the show notes. Cool. Well, Rob, thanks again for taking the time with us and sharing the library and sharing, about your experience with it and building it and why you did stuff and helping us learn a little bit more about the fun world of web development. Grant, thank you again for just being around and being my rock.
I'm just a pretty face today. You're welcome.
Cool.
Well, thank you guys.
Yeah. And that's it for the show. Rob, if anyone wants to find you,
where are they going to find you?
Well,
online, ideally. Maybe not in person.
Out of context here sounds really creepy.
If you want to find me, I have a blog, Develop to Design, and it's literally those 3 words tied together, developtodesign.com. And that would probably be the best place, or the Agnostic Ui GitHub repo. I'm pretty active in there.
Cool. Sounds great. Well, until next time, thank you everyone who stuck around for the live stream, and thank you for the people that are listening on the podcast. We'll catch you next time, and that's it.
All right.
It's over.
I just hit stop.
Okay. They can't hear you waving, Austin.
Okay.